sister's pregnancy seized my room. My parents cast me out. A decade passed. They called not for apologies, but because they desperately needed me. They sent me away when I was just 14. They replaced me, my room, my entire life, just because my sister got pregnant. 10 years later, the phone rang, but it wasn't an apology. No, it was a desperate plea for help. A stark admission that the very family who discarded me now needed me. It all started when I was 14. My older sister, Lena, then 17, was always the golden child. My parents, Dad, 45, and Mom, 43, practically worshipped the ground she walked on. Then came the bombshell. Lena was pregnant with her deadbeat boyfriend, Zane's kid. You'd think they'd be furious, right? Nope. Mom immediately hugged Lena, weeping about being a young grandmother, about how fortunate our family was. Dad just sat there, staring at his plate, silent as always. That's classic Dad. Never stood up to Mom, not once. I remember my jaw hitting the table. Are you kidding me? If I had told them I got a girl pregnant at 14, I'd have been shipped off to military school faster than you could blink. Lena, though, hugs and congratulations. That's basically my entire childhood in a nutshell. The double standards were insane. I got a C in math, lost my gaming privileges for a month. Lena failed 2 classes, and Mom declared she was going through a tough time emotionally, then bought her a new phone to cheer her up. I could write a novel about the preferential treatment, but I'll spare you the painful details. And Zane? He was the epitome of a deadbeat. Fired from 4 jobs in a year. Showed up last Christmas with a gift for Lena that still had the security tag on it. We all pretended not to notice, but come on. He'd show up uninvited, raid our fridge, and talk to my parents like they owed him something. He had a ridiculous neck tattoo that said no regrets. Ironic, given his life choices, and drove a beat-up Honda that made our whole street smell like burning oil. Zane first showed up for dinner about 3 months before the pregnancy announcement. He bragged about not believing in college because entrepreneurs don't need degrees. This was a guy working at a car wash, living in his mom's basement, but my parents just nodded along as if he were some business guru. Dad would shoot me a look that screamed, "Is this guy for real?" But he never said anything. I actually tried to warn them once. I overheard Zane on the phone in our backyard, detailing how he'd been kicked out of his ex-girlfriend's house for using her dad's credit card. When I told Mom, she just brushed it off. People deserve second chances, honey. Zane is going through a rough patch. A rough patch that seemed to last his entire life. Growing up the less favored child makes you question yourself. For years, I wondered if I was the problem. Maybe if I were more like Lena, vivacious, popular, pretty, my parents would treat me the same. I tried everything to get their attention. Good grades, a clean room, joining activities I thought would impress them. Nothing worked. Lena could burn down the house, and they'd probably blame it on faulty wiring. I remember this vividly when I was 12. Lena was 15. We had 2 events on the same night, my science fair and her choir concert. Guess which one my parents attended? Yep. They went to see Lena sing one line in a group number, while I stood alone next to my renewable energy project, which had taken weeks to build. My teacher kept asking where my parents were, and I mumbled something about traffic. They didn't even bother to stop by afterward. I won second place, by the way. They never knew, or cared. About a week after Lena's pregnancy announcement, Mom called a family meeting. I knew that meant bad news for me. Lena showed up 20 minutes late, as usual, complaining about her back pain from carrying a human life. Mom instantly sprang up to buy her a special pregnancy cushion, and I just rolled my eyes. They made us sit in the living room. Mom and Dad on the big couch, Lena on the love seat, and me stuck in the dining room's awful wooden chair. Even the seating arrangements were a metaphor for my place in the family hierarchy. Then they dropped the bomb. They needed to reconsider our living arrangements now that the baby was on the way. Basically, I was being sent to live with my grandparents in Florida so Lena could use my room as a nursery. It's only temporary, Mom mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. Lena needs our support system right now. I looked at Dad, silently begging him to say anything to protect me. He just whispered, "It'll be good for you to spend time with Grandpa and Grandma. They have a nice pool." A freaking pool. Like that compensated for being evicted from my own home. Lena had the audacity to chime in, "You should be grateful. At least you don't have to deal with midnight feedings and diaper smell." Then she chuckled and added, "Plus, I've always wanted your room. It gets better sunlight for the baby." I just sat there, utterly stunned. They were talking about my entire future as if I wasn't even in the room, like I was some piece of furniture to be moved when it became inconvenient. I waited for someone to say, "Just kidding," or offer an alternative, but it never came. When exactly am I supposed to leave? I finally managed to ask, my voice cracking. "Well, Mom began checking her phone. Grandma and Grandpa said you could come anytime, but we thought maybe after the school year ends. That gives you about 6 weeks to say goodbye to your friends." 6 weeks. Like that was a generous time frame to uproot my entire life. My whole life was here. My friends, my school, the comic book store where I spent my weekends, the park where I was just getting good at skateboarding. Everything. Do I get any say in this? I asked, already knowing the answer. "Honey," Mom murmured in that fake compassionate tone she used when she didn't actually care. "Sometimes families have to make tough decisions. This is what's best for everyone." Everyone except me, I thought. "Don't be so dramatic," Lena scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It's not like being sent to prison. Florida has beaches and stuff." I can still recall the exact moment I realized I was entirely disposable to my family. It was when my mother casually mentioned they'd repaint my room, which I'd only gotten to paint dark blue last year after begging for weeks, to a bright, cheerful yellow for the baby. She was already deciding which of my posters to take down and where the crib would go, all while I sat right there. But what about my school, my friends, the soccer team tryouts? I asked, fighting back tears. "You'll make new friends," Mom said dismissively. "And Florida schools are probably better anyway." I looked at Lena, hoping for some flicker of remorse. She was texting someone, completely oblivious to the conversation that was shattering my world. When she finally looked up, she just asked, "Can we wrap this up? I'm meeting Zane for dinner." That night, I locked myself in my room and cried for the first time in years. No one seemed to notice, or care. The next few weeks were hell. Lena started moving baby supplies into my room before I'd even packed. She and Mom went shopping for baby clothes, while I was told we needed to budget when I asked for new sneakers for Florida. One day, I came home from school to find my bookshelf emptied, all my books stacked in cardboard boxes in the hall. When I asked what was happening, Mom replied, "Oh, we need the shelf for the baby's things. You weren't taking those books to Florida anyway, right? We'll store them in the attic." Those books were my escape. I'd saved for years, buying them at yard sales and the used bookstore. Some had my little thoughts scribbled in the margins. Now they were being packed away as if they and I meant nothing. Zane started sticking around more, acting like he owned the place. One day, I saw him wearing my favorite Bulls hoodie. When I confronted him, he just shrugged. "Chill, little man. You won't need warm clothes in Florida anyway." I wanted to slap him. The worst part, Mom saw the whole thing and said nothing. Actually, that's not true. She told me to stop making a fuss when I demanded my hoodie back. Zane just smirked behind her. I never got that hoodie back, by the way. He probably sold it or lost it. Things just got worse. Mom and Lena would have detailed conversations about the baby right in front of me, as if I were invisible. They discussed converting my desk into a changing station, or removing my bed to make room for the crib, erasing every last trace of me from that space. I tried explaining it to my friends, but they didn't really get it. Most of them thought moving to Florida sounded cool. "Dude, you'll live right by the beach." Or, "Maybe you'll see an alligator." They didn't understand I was being kicked out of my own family. My best friend, Liam, was the only one who seemed to grasp how messed up it was. "That's some serious BS, man," he said. They can't just ship you off because your sister got knocked up. That's not your fault. It felt good to have someone acknowledge what I was feeling, but it didn't change anything. I was still being sent away, and no one who could do anything about it seemed concerned. One night, I tried talking to Dad alone while he was in the garage. Dad, this isn't fair. Why do I have to leave? Why can't Lena and Zane get their own place? He just sighed, looking utterly defeated. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices as a family. Your mother thinks this is best for everyone. But what do you think? I pressed. He just shook his head. What I think doesn't really matter around here, son. You know that. I saw something in his eyes that night, a dejected expression that made me realize he'd stopped fighting my mother years ago, maybe even before I was born. I was terrified of my future if I stayed in that toxic environment. I made one last-ditch effort. I went to my guidance counselor at school, thinking she could intervene. She was concerned and called my parents in for a meeting. But, of course, Mom put on her perfect parent act, gushing about how wonderful it would be for me to bond with my grandparents, how they were making this sacrifice as a family. The counselor agreed wholeheartedly. As we left her office, Mom squeezed my shoulder so hard it hurt and whispered, "Don't ever try to embarrass this family again." The final straw was overhearing Lena on the phone with a friend. She was laughing. "Yeah, it's perfect. The brat is getting shipped off, so the baby gets a whole nursery. Mom has already promised to help with night feedings, so I can still hang out sometimes." That's when it truly hit me. I was just an inconvenience, a problem they could solve by sending me away. To Lena, I wasn't a sibling whose life was being uprooted. I was just the brat getting in the way of her ideal little setup. The day before I left, I went to my old treehouse in the woods behind our neighborhood. Dad and I built it together when I was 7. One of the rare times he genuinely spent quality time with me. It wasn't fancy, just plywood and 2x4S, but it had been my sanctuary. I hadn't been up there in a long time, had outgrown it, but it felt vital to go one last time. When I got there, the ladder was gone. Someone had spray painted, "Zane was here," across the front. The small window was broken, and inside were beer cans and cigarette butts. I sat there for hours, staring at this emblem of my youth invaded and destroyed, just like everything else in my life. No one made a special dinner for me on my last night. Mom was helping Lena register for baby items online. Dad watched TV in silence. I bought a pizza with my own money and ate it alone in my almost empty room, sitting on the floor because my bed had already been disassembled to make space for the crib that had arrived that morning. So, at 14, I moved to Florida to live with my grandparents. It wasn't bad. My 68-year-old grandmother and 70-year-old grandfather treated me far better than my own parents ever had. But starting high school in a new state, knowing no one, was a disaster. I was the new kid with a northern accent. On my first day, a student asked me where I was from and why I moved. When I explained my pregnant sister needed my room, he stared at me like I had 2 heads. "Dude, that is messed up," he said. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that what happened to me wasn't normal or okay. I almost cried right there in the cafeteria. That first month was tough. I kept to myself, ate lunch alone, and went straight home. Grandma always had food ready and asked about my day, not just generally, but about my classes and teachers specifically. It was surreal to have an adult genuinely interested in my life. One afternoon, I just broke down at the kitchen table while doing homework, bawling. Grandma sat with me, not saying a word, just stroking my back until I could breathe again. Then she said something I'll never forget. "What your parents did was wrong, and you are entitled to be furious about it. But do not let that anger consume everything good within you." Grandpa was cool, too. He had a workshop in the garage and started showing me how to use tools. He said my hands were good for intricate work. It was the first time I'd ever been complimented on my physical abilities. Dad had never bothered to teach me things like that. My first DIY project was a simple wooden box with dovetail joints. Grandpa displayed it on the mantel, like a treasured artifact, proudly showing it to everyone who visited, telling them his grandson made it. I feigned embarrassment, but it felt incredible to have someone proud of me. I rarely heard from my folks back home. Mom called once a month, made awkward small talk, then spent 20 minutes showing me pictures of Lena's baby, Sophie, on FaceTime. Dad would hop on for a minute at the end, say, "Be good to your grandparents," and hang up. Lena only called or texted when she needed something. The first time she called me personally, about 3 months after I moved, I was actually excited. Maybe she missed me? Nope. She wanted me to convince Grandma and Grandpa to send a larger check for the baby's christening gift. I hung up on her. For my 15th birthday, my parents sent a card that arrived 3 days late. Inside, a $25 iTunes gift card and a bland letter. "Not even we miss you." Grandma and Grandpa, though, threw me a real party with a handmade cake and bought me a good laptop for school. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Slowly, I adjusted. I joined the computer club at school, made friends who didn't care that I was the new kid. Jaden, a neighbor, and I hung out a lot. His parents were divorced, so he understood family turmoil. I discovered I was actually pretty good with computers. That new laptop became my obsession. I taught myself basic programming, hardware diagnostics, even some graphic design. Grandpa noticed my passion and started bringing home broken devices from yard sales for me to experiment with. He'd wink, either you'll fix it or it's already broken, so no harm done. When I turned 16, I worked hard, got straight A's, joined the computer club, and started a part-time job at Best Buy. Grandpa taught me about saving and investing. I saved every penny. I had a plan. Never rely on my parents again. Never be in a position where they could just dispose of me when I became inconvenient. Working at Best Buy was a game changer. I made good money, learned tons about technology and how to talk to customers. My manager, Rick, took me under his wing, giving me increasingly complex repair jobs. "Kids have a knack for figuring things out," he'd tell the other staff. For the first time, I felt valued for my abilities. By junior year, I had great friends, joined the track team, and dated a girl named Chloe. She moved to California for college, but we stayed friends. Life was normal. Sometimes I went weeks without thinking about my parents or Lena. The pain never entirely went away, but it dulled from a violent stab to a persistent ache. I returned home once during my junior year for Thanksgiving, because Grandma insisted we all spend it together. The visit was eye-opening. My old room was completely transformed. Pink walls, crib, changing table. No trace I'd ever lived there. Lena was living at home with Sophie, who was then a toddler. Zane was between jobs, as usual, and spent my entire visit playing video games. The craziest thing was how they all pretended nothing had happened. For them, sending me away was just a routine family thing. Mom would say things like, "Oh, we should show you the mall they've renovated since you lived here," as if I'd just been off at camp. Dad felt a little better. He did apologize one night when we were alone, claiming he should have handled things better. But it was too little, too late. I couldn't wait to get back to Florida. That visit solidified it. My grandparents' house had become more of a home than my parents' ever was. At 18, my parents flew down for my high school graduation. It was awkward as hell. They acted like the previous 4 years hadn't happened. Mom kept showing my grandparents' friends pictures of Sophie, now 4, and talking about how Lena was such an outstanding young mother despite her difficulties. Difficulties meaning the results of her own choices. Zane, for example, had moved out when Sophie was 6 months old, then back in, then out again, a pattern he'd repeat nearly a dozen times. Or how Lena was fired from 3 retail jobs for repeatedly calling in sick, read, hungover. But in Mom's eyes, Lena was still this poor, struggling angel who deserved constant support and admiration for doing the basic parenting millions of people do every day. At the graduation banquet, I announced I wasn't returning home. I was staying in Florida, buying my own house and starting my own computer repair business. Mom looked stunned. Dad just nodded. as if he'd known this was coming all along. But you don't want to come home? Mom asked, genuinely puzzled. Your room is still there. It wasn't my room anymore. It was Sophie's room, which I'd seen in the background of countless video calls. No, I answered simply. My home is here now. The hurt expression on her face almost made me laugh. What did she expect? That I'd be grateful to return to the place where I'd been discarded like old furniture, to live as a visitor in what was once my home. Later that night, Grandpa pulled me aside and pressed a $5,000 check into my palm. Seed money, he called it, for your business. Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with first month's rent on your apartment. He winked. I believe in you, kid. That night, I had a crucial realization. Family is more than just blood. It's the people who make room for you in their lives, recognize your worth, and believe in you. By that measure, my grandparents were more family to me than my parents and sister ever were. From 18 to 24, I built my computer repair business from scratch into a reputable IT consulting firm. I've got my own condo, a new car, and actual savings. Not wealthy by any means, but stable and independent. Those first few years on my own were challenging. I lived in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. I worked long hours, doing repairs by day, taking online classes at night for certifications, and cold calling businesses on weekends. Ramen became a food group. Sleep became optional. At first, I was just fixing personal computers, virus removal, hardware upgrades, data recovery. I charged less than the big companies, so I got a lot of word-of-mouth business. I'd make house calls on my bike, toolkit in my backpack, because I couldn't afford a car. My big break came when I helped the owner of a local accounting firm recover data from what they thought was a fried server. A large IT company had quoted them thousands for the job. I fixed it in one afternoon for a few hundred. The owner was so thrilled, he hired me on a monthly retainer for all their IT needs. That was my first real business contract. Things slowly clicked into place. Word of mouth spread. A satisfied client would recommend me to another. I hired my first employee at 20, a community college student who knew networks. By 22, I had an actual office space and 3 staff. Now I have a team of 5, including a full-time office manager who handles everything I hate doing. The best thing about starting my own business wasn't the money, it was the control. For the first time in my life, I was making my own decisions, setting my own rules. No one could ship me off, steal my room, or tell me I wasn't important. I was creating something entirely unique to me. Meanwhile, from what I heard, Lena, now 27, was still living at home with Sophie, who was 10. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester, blaming the demands of having a child. Zane had been in and out, frequently borrowing money and vanishing for months. Every now and then, I'd get updates through holiday cards or a rare call from Dad. Zane apparently got another girl pregnant when Sophie was 3, causing drama. Then, he spent a few months in jail for driving with a suspended license and an unlicensed pistol. Quality man, that Zane. Lena had a habit of getting jobs and then quitting or getting fired within a few months. Retail, waitressing, receptionist. Nothing ever stuck. She always had excuses. The manager was harsh. The hours were too long. Customers were rude. But based on Dad's weary comments, the real issue was she just didn't want to work. Why should she, when my folks were always there to bail her out? On Sophie's 7th birthday, I sent her a tablet filled with educational games and ebooks. It was probably more expensive than I should have spent, but I wanted her to have something special. A few days later, I got a text from Lena with a photo of Sophie holding the tablet, but the message was just, she says, thanks for the iPad. It wasn't even an iPad, but whatever. Lena didn't express a personal thank you. Didn't acknowledge the effort I put into selecting age-appropriate content. Just the bare minimum. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. Not because I wanted thanks, but because it showed nothing had changed. Lena was still the same selfish person, and my parents still enabled her. My parents, now 53 and 55, were essentially raising Sophie, while Lena worked part-time at a nail salon and socialized with friends. Mom still made excuses, describing Lena as a young, free spirit who needs time to find herself. On the rare occasions we spoke, Dad sounded increasingly exhausted. The last time he told me he was postponing his retirement because they were still assisting Lena in getting on her feet. He was 55 with back pain and high blood pressure. He should have been retiring, not supporting his almost 30-year-old daughter and grandchild. I maintain minimal contact. Christmas cards and birthday texts. That's it. Every year, I sent Sophie birthday and Christmas gifts, mostly books or educational toys. I'd never met her in person, which was strange to think about. I had a niece I'd only ever seen through screens. Grandma and Grandpa remained my primary support. They never treated me like a burden or an afterthought. Grandpa died 2 years ago, peacefully in his sleep from a heart attack, and it hit me harder than anything I'd felt about my immediate family in years. I still call Grandma twice a week and go to Sunday supper whenever I can. Grandpa's funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. My parents came down, but Lena didn't. She said she couldn't get a sitter for Sophie, which was ridiculous. My parents could have looked after her. The truth was, she didn't want to make the effort. My grandfather, who had essentially saved me when my own family abandoned me, wasn't worth the 6-hour drive to her. At the funeral, Mom tried to make it about her, crying and telling everyone how amazing her father had been, as if she hadn't contacted or seen him in a decade. Dad genuinely seemed heartbroken and was extremely helpful with the arrangements, which I appreciated. After the funeral, I overheard Mom telling one of Grandma's friends that they were concerned about how I was dealing with the loss and had offered to have me stay with them for a bit. A complete lie. They had done nothing of the sort. That was Mom for you, always playing to an audience. On my 23rd birthday, Lena sent me a text. Happy birthday, bro. No capitalization, not even my name. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. About an hour later, she texted again, asking if I could lend her $800 for car repairs. I ignored it. She sent 3 more messages over the next week, each one increasingly guilt-tripping, until the final one accused me of leaving the family and not caring about my niece's safety because she needed a reliable car to take Sophie to school. I finally responded, ask Zane or Mom and Dad. They're your support system, remember? She didn't text again after that. That's the problem with people like Lena. They only remember you exist when they need something. 10 years of essentially no communication, and now I was expected to hand over money because we're family. The audacity was nearly astounding. Meanwhile, I was building a life I was proud of. My business was growing steadily. I had great friends and dated occasionally. Nothing serious, but not for lack of trying. I was happy, truly happy, in a way I hadn't been as a kid. Sometimes I imagine a parallel universe where my parents stood up to Lena and forced her and Zane to figure out their own living arrangements instead of sending me away. Would I be the same person? Would I have built a similar life? It's impossible to know for sure. But part of me believes that being forced to rely on myself so early made me stronger and more determined. It's not a silver lining I'd wish on anyone else, but it's something I've accepted. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mom. I almost didn't answer, but something told me it might be important. Your sister was in a car accident, Mom explained, her voice quivering. She's okay, but she broke her leg in 3 places and fractured her hip. The doctors say she can't work for at least 6 to 8 months. I waited. I knew there was more. Zane left for good. He said he couldn't handle the pressure and moved to California with some girl he met online. We're struggling with medical bills and taking care of Sophie. Your father's hours got cut back at work, and my arthritis is getting worse. Her tone wavered. We were hoping you could come visit, reunite with the family, and meet Sophie properly. Your father deeply misses you. Translation: the golden child has finally failed beyond repair. Her deadbeat baby daddy has abandoned her for good. They suddenly remembered they had another child who might actually be useful. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. 10 years. It had taken 10 years and a financial crisis for them to reach out in any significant way. Not because they missed me or regretted their actions, but because they needed something from me. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, but then I remembered Sophie, a 10-year-old child caught in all this adult drama. None of it was her fault. And to be entirely honest, a small, vindictive part of me wanted them to see who I had become without them. I wanted them to realize that the kid they'd abandoned had built a life for himself that they now needed to rely on. So I called Mom back and said I'd come in a few weeks. I booked a motel instead of staying at their place. There was no way I was sleeping on their couch or, God forbid, in what used to be my room. Walking into my former home felt surreal. The walls were covered in family photos, mostly Sophie at various ages with Lena and my parents. I noticed there were only 2 pictures of me, my high school graduation and an old school picture from when I was about 12. My old bedroom had been transformed into a princess-themed children's room, complete with pink walls and unicorn bedding. Lena sat on the couch, leg in a cast, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I walked in. "Oh, you actually came," she remarked, surprised. Mom hovered uneasily while Dad held me tightly and muttered, "I've missed you," into my ear. He looked considerably older, more worn out. Things changed when Sophie came home from school. She was bright and curious, with none of Lena's entitled demeanor. After a timid start, she lit up when she discovered I worked with computers, inundating me with questions about coding and gaming. That night, after Sophie went to bed, they finally got to the point. They were drowning in medical bills. Lena couldn't work. Zane was gone. They were overdue on both the mortgage and Sophie's private school tuition. "We understand it's a lot to ask," Mom added, "but you're doing so well in business. We were hoping you'd be able to help us." Lena finally seemed interested in my existence. "Yeah, bro must be nice having all that freedom and money." I looked around at everyone. My entitled sister, who had never faced consequences, my enabling mother, who always put herself first, and my meek father, who never stood up for me, but now looked truly regretful. "I'll help," I finally said. Mom erupted into tears of relief. "But I have conditions," I explained. "I'm not giving anybody a blank check. I'll pay for Sophie's basic expenses and medical bills directly to the providers, not to any of you. And the money goes through Dad, not either of you two," I stated, glaring at Lena and Mom. Lena's smile vanished. "What? You don't trust us, or something?" "No, actually I don't." Mom was visibly upset, but Dad just nodded, perfectly understanding. "That's fair," Dad replied. "You have no reason to trust us." I also made Lena agree to participate in job training once she was physically capable. She stormed out, but Dad surprised me by agreeing that it was more than reasonable. Dad followed me out to my car that night. "I should have stood up for you back then," he whispered quietly. "It was easier to just go along with your mother and Lena. I've regretted it every day since you left." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I did appreciate the admission. "Take care of Sophie," I instructed. "She deserves better than all this drama." As I drove back to my hotel, I realized I no longer hated them. I simply felt sad for them. They had created this disaster through their favoritism and enabling, and now they were living in it. Meanwhile, I was free, the neglected son who created himself out of nothing. Perhaps eventually I'll have a meaningful relationship with Sophie, perhaps even with Dad. But for the time being, their recognition that they needed me after years of making me feel useless, that was enough. Final update, because this story blew up more than I imagined. Many of you asked if my grandmother knew I was financially assisting my parents. Yes, she knows and supports my decision to help Sophie, but she had some harsh comments for my sister that I won't repeat here. Grandma is a wise woman who taught me that being the bigger person doesn't always mean letting others walk all over you. It means setting boundaries while also doing the right thing. I miss you, Grandpa, And no, I didn't go back to live with them. I see Sophie and Dad on occasion, but my life is now in Florida. Sophie is incredibly intelligent, and we video chat once a week, discussing books and coding. I'm trying to be the person I needed when I was her age. To those who suggest I should cut them off completely, I understand, believe me. But Sophie is innocent in all of this, and I don't want to punish her for her mother's faults. And to everyone who has shared similar stories, I'm sorry you went through it and hope you find peace, just as I have. If my parents died, would I take Sophie? Absolutely. She deserves a chance to live a regular life.